I love collecting design books, and so must all of you, because one of the most common questions I get asked online is about my book collection. So in this video, I'm going to be going over my ultimate design book collection as a freelance graphic designer. I'm going to be breaking down the books into a few different categories, starting with this one, which I'm calling the Peer Graphic Design Reference category. All right, let's get into it. If you've been around the channel before or just seen any type of information about graphic design and what books you should buy online, I'm sure you've seen this big ass book, Logo Modernism. I've been talking about this all the way since one of my early book videos, and like I said, tons of other people recommend it online, but that's for a good reason. This book is absolutely filled with timeless logos that I think still hold up to this day, and it's one of the books that I always reference whenever I'm starting a new logo or branding project. It's not only a bunch of logos either, there's actually some case studies following some of the coolest brand identities. There's one that I really like about the Olympics in Mexico, and then there's also just some profiles on some of the best logo designers in the game. Next up, we have one about color right here, Joseph Alber's Interaction of Color, another timeless classic that I'm sure you've read in some kind of graphic design blog or Instagram carousel post. Honestly, it's warranted. This book is a really good tool if you're trying to master color and learn about how they work together. Not only shows you like different things like the basics like complementary colors, triadic and whatnot, but it also dives deeper into things like optical illusions and how this color can look different placed on top of this color and vice versa, and a bunch of different color harmonies and things like that. It gets pretty granular and like scientific, and you definitely nerd out a little bit when you're diving deep into it, but the reason I put it in this reference category is I think this book alongside some of these logo books are good to reference when you're working on projects and you run into some problems or want to experiment with some new things. So the next ones, I kind of group these together. They are symbol and logo type. They're similar to the Logo Modernism books, and there is some crossover, don't get me wrong, especially in the symbol one. But these books, man, I'm always referencing these when I'm starting new logo projects. The reason I prefer these two smaller books a little bit more than the giant Logo Modernism book is probably pretty obvious. I can actually bring these around, take them to a coffee shop, throw them up and around my desk, and it's not having this like fucking Titanic sized book on my desk all the time. The symbol book's cool because it groups together not only some of those classic logo modernist type logos, but it also has a lot more contemporary new stuff. And the logo type one I really like personally because I think logo types are one of the strongest options for a logo. So it's really cool to look and see how fonts can be customized, or just some of the most famous brands, how simple they are using just a basic sans serif. This next one is actually a book that I'm starting a series off of over on Instagram if you want to check that out. It's called the Graphic Design Idea Book. It's basically 50 ideas from 50 dope designers who all kind of have their own little specialty, and just quick little things you can kind of flip to any page, you know, illusion, transformation, color, black and white, parody, whatever. And the idea I have is actually to make a design for each of the prompts. So if you guys want to try that too, it could be cool. And it's a nice little book just to reference too if you ever want to get any inspiration or just are having some creative block in either personal work or some kind of client project. So we have another one about color, and this is the Designer's Dictionary of Color. A little less scientific and nerdy than the other color book. It's just something kind of cool, and it's similar to the idea book. You can kind of flip to any page and just see like, oh, here's a color, avocado, you know, and it'll show you like a cool actual in situation graphic design example, gives you a little like of the cultural meaning, some other names for this color, and it's just a good way to get inspiration for your own design work. And it's also just a nice little read and something cool. If you're not sick of corporate logo designs and stuff yet, you can check out this one, the American Trademark Design. I thought that there would be a lot of crossover in this one from the Logo Modernist book and the other ones, but there's actually a lot of original ones that I've never seen in here. I also really like how it's printed on this kind of, I guess, cheaper newsprint, because it has a cool like ghosting effect, and you can see some of the ones coming up. And honestly, there's just some crazy ones in here, and there's a lot more vintage ones. You could tell that this was before they refined some of the logos, like some stuff that's more hand drawn or just kind of out there that you wouldn't see coming up into the 70s more and stuff. I mean, look how dope this Mayflower one is. That thing's crazy. Definitely check it out. Last but not least, for the Peer Graphic Design Reference book is this beast, Type Spec. specimen. There's not a lot in here to learn, you know, from like an educational or reading standpoint. It's just a giant specimen book for that catalogs some of the most famous typefaces at the time. And yeah, you can go online and see all this stuff or download them, like Franklin Gothic, Euro Style, Baskerville, Cooper, you know, like some of the heavy hitter classics. But what I like about this is, you know, sometimes when you're doing research and trying to find a font, it gets kind of annoying just always being online all the time and in front of a screen. And I think we're doing that enough as designers. So it's cool to have like an actual physical book to reference. And yeah, a lot of these fonts are old, but they hold up and they're timeless for a reason. And maybe you'll be inspired to use an old font you didn't know about in a current project. So this next one is what I'm calling like inspirational and coffee table type books, stuff to look at when you want to be inspired or just cool to have around the house. This first one is one of my all-time favorites, and I know I've talked about it before, but it's the cover art of all the Blue Note records. And Reed Miles is this dope designer who designed a lot of the Blue Note album covers in the 70s and 80s and stuff like that, and they're just so good. Like, it inspired me to do a whole project about it, and I feel like Reed Miles was so ahead of his time, and it really kind of solidified Blue Note not only as a record label but their art direction. Like, everyone, when they think of jazz, they kind of think of this gradient map style. Not only did they have some heavy hitters in the jazz game like Thelonious Monk or Herbie Hancock, but they actually had the dopest album art too. You can flip to any of these and be constantly inspired, and there's a bunch of editions of this book, so if you can find one online, it's well worth it. This next one is Protest: Aesthetics of Resistance. It has some stories in it, but it's basically a compilation of all this cool artwork that's around protesting and kind of revolutions. There's things like posters, billboards, lots of graffiti, things like that. And I think it's inspiring as like a contemporary designer to see some of this cool typography and image and pop art type stuff, them doing that way back in the day. What I really like about this book too is it actually is designed really nice too. It has like cool typography. The sans serif like lettering goes all the way to the edge, so you get kind of a cool viewing experience as well as inspiration from some cool art. The only downside is, if I'm being real, this book's really hard to find. I got it for retail and I didn't know it was like all rare or anything, but now when I try to look for it online, it's a little bit tricky, but if you do some Google searching, I'm sure you can find it. So these next ones are from Masala Noir. They make a bunch of books that catalog different categories of design and just stuff to flip through and look at. One of these bigger ones that I want to mention independently from the others is called Noise Graphics. Bunch of cool kind of grungy inspo from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, just cataloging cool noise and punk style art. And I think if you're into this stuff, like the kind of Xerox art and zine culture, this one's really cool. Lots of inspiration. It's one of their only hardcover books. And the owner was nice enough to send me a bunch of these books a few months ago, so I really appreciate that. 8-bit video games. This one's really cool. The Japanese punk graphics. This one I highly recommend. Rave tapes, one of my other favorites. If you're into any of the kind of techno and house stuff from the early 80s and 90s, this has a bunch of dope cassette designs. And yeah, there's a bunch, and if you're into design or art, I'm sure there's a niche for you on there that you'd like to check out. So this next one isn't necessarily design, but like I said, this category is about inspiration, and it's this book about Wes Anderson. He's kind of like the designer's director because he's known for these dope symmetrical kind of shots that he does, using a lot of Futura as well as some nice colors and just cool art direction through both his live action and animation movies. This book's cool because it just outlines some of the behind the scenes of some of the cool movies like Royal Tenenbaums or Fantastic Mr. Fox, and it's just cool to see how this stuff was made. And just from a photography standpoint as well as like an art direction and typography standpoint, it's super inspirational, and Wes Anderson is really good at building out worlds and focusing on some of the cool design stuff within movies. Next up, we have this book called Knox by Ann Carson. If you've heard of this, then you know why I brought it up, but I actually had to buy this book for I think it was a creative writing class or something I did in college, and the only reason I'm bringing it up is not because, you know, it's about design or anything. It's actually kind of a sad story, but the reason I like it so much is the way, look at this. This is the way you read the book. It comes out like this in these crazy kind of like fold up pages, and I just think from a publication design standpoint, it's super inspirational, and it shows you can be creative not only with storytelling, but actually the way you give the viewer a cool experience and something that they actually want to show to people, and just like a cool designed piece overall. This next collection of books is educational, something that I've learned a lot from, and just ones that you actually have to read and not just look at pretty pictures. So first up, we have the How to Be a Graphic Designer Without Losing Your Soul. This this one's really cool because it outlines this designer, Adrian Shaughnessy, and his kind of experience working as a freelancer and in a design studio. And when I was actually working at one of my full-time jobs when I first graduated college, I read this and it was very inspirational for me to like learn about how you can do things other than just working as an employee. You know, some of the attributes that you need to be like a successful modern designer, as well as some of the main differences of like working in-house, freelance, at a studio, and things like that. I think both new and experienced designers can benefit from checking this one out. Next up, we have Michael Johnson's Branding. The reason I have so many brand identity and logo books is that was my main focus when I first started design, and I still do a lot of that in my freelance practice, but I was really into it for a while. And this is a simple book that shows you like all the ins and outs of branding, as well as like how to build out systems rather than just simple logo designs. It's called Branding in 5.5 steps, and the simple steps are investigate, strategy and narrative, bridging the gap, design, implementation, and engage or revive. I think this book's really good at teaching you how to build out full fleshed out projects, not only for the client, but to put into your portfolio. This book's called The 10 Faces of Innovation. It's a really dope book by Tom Kelly, who works at this cool design studio called IDEO. And this one's a little bit more on like the creativity and just like overall design as a whole, not just graphic design. I think there's a lot of good information here. Like I said, it's good for both designers and overall just anyone working in a creative profession. It compiles these different personas and strategies coined by the creative team at IDEO. The 10 Faces of Innovation are kind of like those personality tests that they make you take, and they determine if you're an experimenter, director, collaborator, etc. All of it may not be super useful if you don't work with others all the time, but at the very least, it can help you reflect on yourself and learn more about why you are the way you are and how you interact creatively with other people. This one, along with the last one, I got in a design program when I was early out in school, and this one's called Universal Principles of Design. It's definitely more of like a general kind of communication and knowledge book, not specifically graphic design, but I think it's good stuff to learn about. This book breaks down 100 ways to make designs more functional, increase their aesthetic, and overall make better design decisions. The book covers good principles of design, whether it's product, graphic, or industrial. I think it's good to learn the fundamentals and have a general knowledge around this stuff, even if it's not your primary focus, or even if you're a more artistic type of graphic designer. However, I think this book would be particularly good if you're getting into industrial design, product design, or UI UX stuff. And after all, I think it's good to know the rules so you can break them. This next one is Freelance and Business and Stuff by the Hoodspa sisters. Amy and Jen Hood are these great designers who are twins that work at the studio called Hoodspa Design, and they've created like this awesome kind of non-pretentious approach to freelancing and business, and it's a very easy read, and it's just some good stuff that they've learned over their time about like taxes and running a studio and working with clients. There's a lot of good nuggets of information in here, and it's also like a workbook type thing, so you can actually solve some of the problems yourself and just level up in your freelance career. I think a book that goes well with that one is the Win Without Pitching Manifesto. This book actually inspired me to make a whole video about how I get more clients, and like I've highlighted and written a ton of stuff in this book. It's really good. It teaches you like how we can get clients without overselling yourself and not having to pitch and do spec work and things. And like some of my favorite chapters in this manifesto are: we will specialize, we'll diagnose before we prescribe, we will be selective, we'll address issues of money early, and things like that. It's just really good business stuff, and if you're a freelancer, highly recommend. I'm sure you've seen this book before, Grid Systems, all-time classic, so I'm not going to dive into it too much. I think every designer needs this book. It teaches you, some of the basics of the 20-point and 32-point grid, shows you some cool examples as well of some text layouts and image layouts. If you're into typography or poster designs or things like that, I think you should really get this book. All right, one of the last educational ones is this, just the classic Meg's History of Graphic Design. This was actually one of my school textbooks, and it goes all the way back to like cave paintings and stuff, to some of the more contemporary like 60s things like Andy Warhol and stuff like that, all the way up to like whenever this book was written in like 2012. There's a lot to talk about in here, so I can't really go over it, but here's like a random page I just flipped to. This is the cool like Plaxtistill, I think it was called. Yeah, like the German type design. That stuff was really cool. It was like German advertising. That's what I actually chose one of my final projects on from this class. If you can find this book for a good price, I think it's worth checking out. This next category is biographical or like story. And first up, we have How To by Michael Beirut. Michael Beirut runs the Pentagram Studio, which is arguably the best studio in the United States for design. And this book is awesome. It's a bunch of just kind of mini case studies of different projects that he's worked on and like how to use design to do different things. So it's like how to use graphic design to sell things, explain things, make things. Like that's kind of the whole idea behind the book. And you know, you could flip to any page and just find like a cool real world example and something that actually happened and learn a lot from it. I used to be a design student. This book compiles like a bunch of little excerpts from professional designers and shows like how they used to be when they were in college to now, and just simple things like their favorite food, what kind of typefaces they liked, where they're working from then and now. And it's pretty inspirational to see where everyone came from, especially these legendary designers like Stefan Sagmeister and stuff like that. And it's an easy read, and you can kind of flip to any of these pages and just check it out a little bit. These last two are actually like more biographical. Brand by Hand by John Contino, one of my favorite designers, does a bunch of cool hand-drawn logos and has a really unique kind of tattoo almost style mixed with typography and calligraphy. And not only goes over some of the cool like stories of his life and things, but actually kind of weaves that into like some of his work, and it's almost like a portfolio book as well. And I think as a designer, this is like the coolest way to do a biography. It's almost like a story mixed in with a visual aspect, and I think it's really good. This one is pretty much a similar format. It's by Aaron Draplin, my favorite designer ever, and just someone that I've always looked up to ever since college. And this goes over all his work. It's called Pretty Much Everything. It goes over his beginnings with drawing and working in snowboarding and magazines, all the way to like selling prints all over the world and creating field notes and things like that. It's really inspirational and honestly a good read. And since it's designed by Aaron Draplin, the book looks really nice as well. All right, this next category I'll try to go through quick, and it's non-design books for designers. These aren't specifically about design, but I think they're important for creativity, productivity, and just overall learning. The first two are my all-time favorites, and I'm a broken record about these, but Digital Minimalism and Deep Work. They're both by Cal Newport, and I think they work amazing together, and they're some of the most helpful like nonfiction books I've ever read. Deep Work is all about being able to focus on creative deep work and minimize distractions, and it just helped me a lot in being disciplined in my freelance practice. Digital Minimalism, I love so much. I made a whole video about it. I'll link that in the description and below. It's basically about using technology only to get the benefits out of it and not be sucked into it and always on your phone and things. And I actually did this 30-day digital detox that they recommend in here, and that was a cool experience. Another one that's a kind of a time management thing, 4,000 Weeks. I like this one because it's different from kind of the other approaches where they're trying to get you to master your time and things like that. It's more of realizing that time isn't infinite and we can only do so much, and you have to make decisions on what you want to prioritize, and don't be stressed out about trying to get everything done. And even if you get a lot done, your brain will automatically fill it with other stuff. So you're always going to be busy, and that's okay. This book also inspired me to make a whole video about my productivity system for graphic designers. You can check that out in the description as well. The PMA Effect, written by John Joseph from the hardcore band The Cro-Mags. Super simple. Basically, be positive and you'll be a better person. I don't want to kind of give it away too much, but it's a cool story as well as just some nice little stuff you can learn from and use in your life to be better. Ishmael, this one is a novel. It's fiction, but I also feel like it's pretty reflective on our time. It's about this guy who talks to a monkey, and that's definitely the most fictitious thing about it. It's about kind of our relationship with the world and how humans are kind of destroying the earth, you know? So, but I don't know. The reason I put this one in here, you might think like that's kind of random for a design book, but it made me think differently about the world and just kind of inspired me to create more and think about my relationship with nature a little bit. And I think it made me a little bit more creative overall. Anything You Want, 40 Lessons for an Entrepreneur. Super small book. As you can see right here, you can flip through this thing in one session. But if you're into kind of building out businesses or want to be more of an entrepreneur, check this one out. All-time classic, 4 Agreements. Everyone should read this. Everyone online's recommended it. I already know. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. and always do your best. Those are the 4 agreements. Read this book if you haven't. I'm sure one of your friends or your relatives already has it. You can borrow it from. These 2 books by Austin Kleon, Show Your Work and Steal Like an Artist. Like I said, I'm sure you've heard about these. Every creative designer, artist should read these. Very helpful for learning how to gather good inspiration, how to promote yourself online, just overall be well-rounded and efficient creative. Rest, this one is all about treating your downtime with respect, battling burnout and things like that, and realizing that you actually get more done when you work less, because you got to give yourself time to recharge and rest. You can't just be working all the time. Why Last Man graphic novel series. If you're not into comics or graphic novels, that's all right, but trust me, this one's worth reading. It inspired me both artistically, from a storytelling standpoint. The illustrations are awesome, and it's just a good thing. Just read it. It's good. You can find the whole series at like Barnes & Noble or something. And lastly, I'm currently reading The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, and I'm loving it so far. Bunch of cool, actionable, small little tips about creativity and just the creative and artistic process. And I think Rick Rubin does a great way of breaking down these complex topics and making them simple, and I'm loving it so far. I'm halfway through, and I think it's going to be a good read all the way through the end. Well, that was a long one. I hope you enjoyed it though. I linked all the books in a Google Doc in the description for you to check out. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Peace.